Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Join the official Telegram channel of Rao's IAS Study Circle to stay updated and get all the materials on the Telegram. The link to the channel can be found in the description box. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading from a UPSC examination perspective. Let us discuss the important news which has appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 5th April 2021. The news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So on this note, let's start our today's discussion. Now as our first discussion, let's take up these two articles appearing on page number 6 and also on page number 7. Now both these articles talks about election manifestos, and it mentions various aspects regarding election manifestos, especially with respect to welfare programs and the aspects of environmental concerns, ecological disasters and also farmers' rights over the issue of industrialization. So both these articles have appeared in a very political sense, especially with respect to the ongoing election in Tamil Nadu. And this particular article on page number 6 effectively compares the different election manifestos released by different political parties, and in the process tries to find out which political party has provided more aspects of welfare or education or employment or women's right, etc. And this particular article on page number 7 highlights the fact that there has been a cultural shift in terms of political parties, as they have for the first time addressed the issue of environmental concerns or environmental crises and ecological disasters along with farmers' rights. But they have said that this change has been because of various past events which have taken place in Tamil Nadu. So with respect to both these articles on election manifestos, first of all let us understand what is election manifesto, and then we shall try to find out what these two articles have provided. Now from our examination perspective, questions can be asked in your mains examination regarding election manifesto and how election manifesto connects to the citizens, especially with respect to different welfare schemes which the political parties announce for the voters. So the article on page number 6 mentions about, or rather compares, different welfare schemes with respect to jobs, education, nutrition, issues related to women, employment, etc. Whereas news on page number 7 mentions about the environmental, ecological disasters and aspects related to farmers' rights over big industrial projects. So in this regard, first of all, let us understand about the election manifestos. Now with respect to election manifesto, generally question can be asked in your either mains examination or even in the prelims examination. Now in the prelims, question can be asked with respect to the aspect of polity and governance and also with respect to public policy and rights issues. And in the mains, this topic can be asked either in GS paper 2 with respect to Indian constitution and governance and also with respect to the aspect of elections, and in GS paper 1 with respect to salient features of Indian society, as to how Indian society is molding itself with respect to various political demands, issues pertaining to development and urbanization and problems and remedies, which is also reflected through political manifestos, effects of globalization on Indian society, and also the aspect of social empowerment and regionalism. So in this backdrop, let us understand both these articles in the context of election manifesto. So the question is that what is an election manifesto? So basically an election manifesto is a list of promises which is made by different political parties to its respective voters. And through the election manifesto, it reflects not only the ideology of the political party which it pursues or which it has pursued in the past and also which it plans to pursue in the future, and based on the ideology, the commitments made by the political party to its citizens or to the voters. So this is basically the purpose of an election manifesto, basically to inform the citizens about the various policies and programs which a particular political party aims to provide to the citizens or the voters if they come to power at the general election either in Lok Sabha or in the state legislative assembly election. Now this term, manifesto, term has been derived from a Latin term known as manifestum, which means a list of facts. And based on these list of facts or list of priorities, the citizens chooses a particular political party during the course of election. Now if you can see, this was the election manifesto for Bharatiya Janata Party, which was termed as Sankalpit Bharat Sashakt Bharat. And it provided for various aspects such as zero tolerance approach on terrorism, national security, welfare for soldiers, combating infiltration, issues relating to agriculture and farmer welfare, doubling of farmers' income, India as the world's third largest democracy, and on that note, roadmap for $5 trillion economy, issues pertaining to infrastructure, issues pertaining to good governance, issues pertaining to women empowerment, education, inclusive development, cultural heritage, etc. And similarly, this was the manifesto of Indian National Congress for the 2019 general elections. And as you can see, it provided for aspects such as employment and growth, aspects related to hard and soft power, aspects related to good governance, aspects related to social justice and empowerment, and aspects pertaining to healthcare, education, and food and nutrition, including water management, sanitation, etc. So, through these election manifestos, different political parties tries to inform or rather educate the voters as to the priorities and the programs which they will implement in case they are voted to power. So effectively, these political manifestos helps the citizens to stay informed about the future priorities and policies which the political parties are going to take. It further helps the political parties to highlight their achievements of the past as to the work which they have done in the past, which was useful for the development of the country. It also highlights or lists number of failures of the opposition party or of the ruling party in case the political manifesto is that of the opposition party. And overall, these election manifestos helps the citizens to exert pressure on the government in case a particular political party comes to power and does not implement these election manifestos. Now, this brings us to the question that whether these election manifestos are legally enforceable. The answer is no. These election manifestos are not legally enforceable as they are merely a set of promises made by the political parties based on which the voters make their decision to vote for any particular political party. Now, another interesting fact about election manifesto is that this part has also been included in the Model Code of Conduct. And therefore, Part 8 of the Model Code of Conduct provides for guidelines issued by the Election Commission on election manifestos. Now, in this regard, the guidelines with respect to the Model Code of Conduct highlights that with regard to the decisions of the Supreme Court and after consultation with political parties, the Commission, in the interest of free and fair elections, has hereby directed the political parties and candidates that while releasing their election manifesto for any election to the Parliament or State Legislative Assembly, they must adhere to the following guidelines. So these guidelines are: election manifesto shall not contain anything repugnant to the ideals and principles enshrined in the Constitution of India, and further that it shall be consistent with the letter and spirit of other provisions of Model Code of Conduct. Next, it says that since the directive principles of state policy as enshrined in Part 4 of the Indian Constitution enjoins upon state or calls upon state to frame various welfare policies or measures for the citizens of India, hence there can be placed no objection on the promises of such welfare measures which is adopted by different political parties in their polling manifesto or in their election manifesto. So there is no bar on political promises made by different political parties based on various welfare programs or schemes which they will implement if in case they are voted to power. However, there is a caveat which states that political parties should avoid making such promises which are likely to vitiate the purity of the election process or exert undue influence on the voters in exercising their voting franchise. Now, this is because it will disturb the level playing field, which the Election Commission must ensure. It further says that in the interest of transparency, level playing field, and credibility of promises, it is expected that manifestos, that is, election manifestos, must also reflect the rationale for the promises and broadly indicate the ways and means to meet the financial requirements for it. It means that political parties need not only highlight the welfare schemes which they intend to implement, but must also state that how they will meet the financial requirement in case such policies or welfare schemes are implemented. And hereby the Election Commission in its guidelines in the Model Code of Conduct states that trust of voters should be sought only on those promises which are possible to be fulfilled. Now, an important point to be noted not only with respect to election manifesto but also with respect to model code of conduct is that model code of conduct in itself is not legally enforceable. Hence, even Part 8 of Model Code of Conduct cannot be made legally enforceable, especially pertaining to election manifestos. Now, in this regard, another additions have been made with respect to these guidelines on election manifesto, especially with respect to the prohibitory period of release of these manifestos during election period. So it highlights that in case of a single phase or multi-phase elections, these election manifestos should not be released during the prohibitory period as which is prescribed under Section 126 of Representation of People Act 1951, which has been provided as a prior of 48 hours. Now, as you can see that Section 126 of Representation of People Act mentions about prohibition of public meetings during period of 48 hours ending with the hour fixed for conclusion of poll. It says that no person shall hold, convene or attend, join or address any public meeting or procession in connection with an election or display to the public any election matter by means of cinematograph, television or other similar apparatus including any advertisements, propagate any election matter to the public by holding or by arranging the holding of any musical concert or any theatrical performance or any other entertainment or amusement with a view to attract the members of the public. And here it says that in any polling area during the period of 48 hours ending with the period for the conclusion of the poll for any election in the polling area. Now, this provision also says that if any person contravenes the above mentioned provisions, then he or she shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend up to 2 years along with fine. So, this provision also provides for a term of imprisonment which can be extended for 2 years along with fine. Now, these aspects pertaining to election manifestos becomes important and questions can be asked in your prelims examination, especially with respect to the conduct of election by Election Commission as mandated under Article 324 of the Indian Constitution. So we see that election manifesto becomes important both from our prelims and mains perspective. As in GS paper 2, specifically it gets covered with respect to the salient features of Representation of People Act 1951. Now coming back to the article on page number 6, as I have already stated that it compares the election manifesto provided by different political parties such as DMK, BJP, Indian National Congress, MNM, etc. And these comparisons are based on different welfare schemes regarding different aspects or different sectors such as education or school, issues pertaining to women, aspects pertaining to job or employment, and also issues on food, health and nutrition. Further, the news on page number 7 highlights about or rather focuses on the aspects of environment and agriculture which has been mentioned in the poll manifestos for the election to be taken place in Tamil Nadu. So here the author says that the mention of environment and also farmers' right is a welcome change and also signals a political shift which the author feels is because of the response of people's aspiration articulated primarily through the medium of protest. And it is here where the author in this article highlights number of protests made by the people in this state in the past. Now these protests includes protest against the nuclear energy plant which was set up in Kundakulam, protest against the coal-bed methane extraction in the delta, against Unilever's mercury pollution in Kodaikanal, protest by fishermen to save Ennore Creek from industrial encroachments. Now if you can see in this map, this is the Ennore Creek. It also mentions about pro-Jallikattu protest against hydrocarbon extraction, which also spread to other delta districts in the state of Tamil Nadu, protest against sterlite, protest against crony capitalism and industrial pollution, and also protest by farmers against the Salem-Chennai Expressway, and also protest by fishermen and farmers against the International Container Transshipment Terminal in Kanyakumari. So the article argues that the state has witnessed number of protests in the past and based on these protests, the political parties have now included aspects of farmers' rights and also aspects pertaining to environment. Further, the article also mentions about the fact that central government adopts a north-centric approach, and because of this, many in Tamil Nadu view that the union government as a North India-centric government and very indifferent to the interest of southern states. And because of central government's north-centric approach, it does not take care into account the local ecological aspect, and this hurts local sentiments. Further, the article mentions about the unfolding of climate disasters, and this has been also one of the primary reasons why the aspect of climate disaster has been included in the Pole Manifesto. As these extreme weather events of the past, including the Chennai floods, Cyclone Varda, Cyclone Okchi, Cyclone Gaj, and also Chennai's Day Zero and water scarcity, which took place in 2019. So it is here where the article says that mentions of these climate disaster in state poll manifestos will help the political class appreciate the gravity of the unfolding ecological disaster. However, the problem highlighted in these articles is that mere highlighting of these poll manifesto or promises in the poll manifesto does not actually end up in implementation of these important issues. So it is here where pressure from the local public from the ground level is necessary to implement the poll manifesto, which is being provided by different political parties, especially pertaining to the aspect of environment and also with respect to farmers' rights pertaining to agriculture. So, as a way forward, this article says that there is a need to address the gap between promises and implementation. There is a need to address climate change collectively by different political parties by coming together, as climate disaster impacts all sections of the population, and also there is a need for public pressure to implement poll manifesto. Now, hereby the article says that politics, with its embedded values of people's aspiration and relationship to land, is quite deep. However, environmentalism of parties, politicians, and manifesto is shallow and demands accountability. And it is here where the aspect of public pressure and political accountability can bridge the gap between the promises made and in its implementation, and thereby making these political parties more responsible towards farmers' rights and also towards climate disasters as it affects sizable population across India. So this part of the syllabus pertaining to environment gets covered under GS paper 3, especially with respect to conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, and also environmental impact assessment and disaster management. So both these articles must be seen from the perspective of election manifestos as to how political parties promises the voters during their election campaign, and how does the voter gets enticed through these election manifesto and also gets informed about the policies and programs which is being offered by different political parties. And regarding the syllabus, it gets covered under GS paper 1, GS paper 2 and also in GS paper 3. And in the prelims, questions can be asked with respect to election manifesto, particularly pertaining to the part which has been provided under the Model Code of Conduct. So with this discussion, let's move to the next article. Now the next news to be discussed appears as an article on page number 6. It says, the Kerala model at the crossroads. The role of planning and social oversight in the economic development of the state needs to expand further. Now this particular article highlights about a particular Kerala model of development whereby it has seen rapid economic development, that is increase in its GDP, along with rapid human development, that is betterment of human developmental indicators in the field of health, nutrition as well as education. And it is here where Kerala among Indian states accounts for one of the best human developmental indicators, especially in the area of literacy, life expectancy at birth, and the aspects related to MMR and IMR, that is maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate. Now, Kerala has seen these developments post 1990, and this rate of growth was earlier not witnessed in Kerala, as growth in Kerala was earlier stagnated. However, growth picked up mainly because of the following reasons, namely increase in agricultural growth rate, increase in remittances from the Gulf, and also setting up of Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board by the state government of Kerala in 1999. And all these aspects have led Kerala to have not only rapid economic growth but also rapid growth in the sector of human development. And it is here where the article says that this has been possible due to a number of reasons, namely strong commitment to decentralization by the Kerala government, empowering of local bodies, namely the Panchayati Raj institutions and municipal corporations, and also enhanced expenditure on social sectors, and also on focus on redistributive policies to reduce inequality and promote sustainable development, particularly in the field of economy, social area, and environment. So, all these aspects cumulatively can be considered to be the Kerala model of development, where we have seen rapid economic growth along with rapid human development. Now, here the role of Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board becomes important, as through this board, the government raises money from the market and invest in the infrastructural sector. And through these investment, the Kerala government has established number of public schools and hospitals. So the Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board, in a way, provides investment for infrastructure projects. And accordingly, the state government of Kerala has used these funds to build public schools and also hospitals, and has also utilized the funds for better use and integration of technology. So the Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board is the principal funding arm of the government of Kerala, and this arm channelizes funds for critical and large public infrastructure projects, and it also mobilizes and channels funds to facilitate planned, hassle-free and sustainable development of physical along with social infrastructure, including land acquisition. So effectively, this board helps the Kerala government to raise money from the market with a legal commitment to pay back to the market in due course of time. And this overall has helped Kerala to increase its per capita income, as Kerala's per capita income, which earlier was 10% lower than the all India average figure in 1989-90, has now increased to 65% higher than the all India figure in 2019-20. Hence, Kerala has clearly shown that it is possible to pursue and achieve the agenda of economic growth and human development simultaneously. However, the article also highlights certain challenges with respect to this Kerala model of development. It says that excessive borrowings could lead to increase in public debt in the future. Further, Kerala might face adverse situation in the future, such as natural disaster, and second, job losses in the West Asian countries, that is in the Gulf countries. And both these aspects might prove detrimental to the Kerala model of investment. And it is because of these two important factors the article highlights that the government must give due emphasis on these factors which may affect the Kerala model of development. Now, another challenge with the article says is that various factors such as climate change, equity, debt sustainability, etc. need to become integral part of developmental planning in the state. So the government needs to take care of all these challenges in order to sustain the Kerala model of development, which so far has ensured rapid economic development along with rapid human development. Now, this article primarily becomes important from our mains perspective and gets covered under GS paper 2 and also under GS paper 3. Now, in GS paper 2, it gets covered under government policies and interventions for development in various sectors, welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections of the population, and issues relating to development and management of social sector and services relating to health, education and human resources. And in GS paper 3 gets covered under the aspect of infrastructure and also investment models. Whereas in the prelims, question can be asked with respect to the aspect of governance and also with respect to the aspect of social and sustainable development. So after understanding about the Kerala model of development, let's move to the next article. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 7. It says, a roadmap for tolerance. Racism will not be overcome with mere professions of good faith but with anti-racist action. Now this article highlights about the perils of racism, especially after the lockdown was imposed because of COVID-19. Now in this regard, this article mentions about the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is celebrated every year on 21st March. And the theme for this particular year is Youth Standing Up Against Racism. So for this year, the theme has been taken as Youth of the World who have stood up against racism. So, this International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination aims to foster a global culture of tolerance, equality, and anti discrimination. So, these are the important three terms as suggested by UNESCO to counter or to fight racism. And it is in this regard, it calls on each and every one of us, that is, all citizens of the world, to stand up against racial prejudice and intolerant attitudes. So, here the term racial prejudice and intolerant attitude becomes important. Now, from our examination perspective, the aspects of discrimination, particularly with respect to Article 14 and 15, becomes important. And as you can see, this topic was dealt in detail on 15th June 2020, whereby we mentioned about the aspect of discrimination and also discrimination based on caste and class. Now, in this discussion, we also mentioned about prejudice. It says that prejudice means to judge other people negatively or to see them as inferior. It highlights that when we think that only one particular way is the best and right way to do things, we often end up not respecting others who may prefer to do things differently. So, here basically, prejudice means to judge other people without actually knowing about them or without actually knowing about their culture. It further highlights that prejudice further develops inequality and discrimination. It says that discrimination happens when people act on their prejudices or stereotypes. That is a thought process which people develop in their mind regarding the inferiority of other culture or community. So it says that if you do something to put other people down, if you stop them from taking part in certain activities and taking up jobs, or stop them from living in certain neighborhoods, or prevent them from taking water from the same well or hand pump, or not allow them to drink tea in the same cup or glasses as others, you are discriminating against them. So, these three aspects are linked together, that is, prejudice, inequality, and discrimination. And the Indian Constitution calls for equality under Article 14 and against discrimination under Article 15. So, in this aspect, this hashtag fight racism is an important tool as it aims to foster a global culture of tolerance, equality, and anti discrimination, and calls on each one of us to stand up against racial prejudice and intolerant attitude. Now, the involvement of youths was witnessed during the 2020 Black Lives Matter marches, which drew millions of demonstrators across the world. And these youth were mostly against racial injustice. Further, these youth also used social media to mobilize participation to call for their peers to speak out against racism. Now, this article highlights that during COVID lockdown, another kind of or another parallel pandemic was unleashed, namely that of hatred, violence, and fear against certain ethnic communities and nationalities. Further, COVID 19 heavily impacted young people, including those from minority backgrounds, as many are now grappling with an increase in racial discrimination. In addition to severe disruptions to their education, diminished employment opportunities or prospects, and limited ability to participate in public life. And all these cumulatively or overall hinder their individual and social empowerment. Now, here the words of former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan becomes very pertinent or important. He had said that our mission is to confront ignorance with knowledge, bigotry with tolerance, and isolation with the outstretched hand of generosity. And racism can, will, and must be defeated. Now, in this regard, this article mentions about modern racism, whereby it highlights about a kind of a covert racism which allows spread of a cocktail of inaccurate information. And this covert racism is mixed with techno-racism, that is use of artificial intelligence and technology to propagate racism through the spread of inaccurate informations. Now, regarding techno racism, this article says that hate sites and specific posts, especially against Asians, grew by 200% in US, India, and Sri Lanka. So, it's necessary to fight racism through anti racist strategies. So, on the social media and internet sites, there has been a call to boycott religious minorities based on false information. Now, this creates a kind of covert racism. Further, the article also mentions about a structural form of discrimination which includes microaggressions on a daily basis and also daily indignities or loss of dignity for particular communities. Further, the article says that there have been various facial recognition programs which are used to target specific communities. And for the women, it has been a double whammy as they not only encounter racial discrimination but also encounter gender discrimination. And overall, racial discrimination deepens and fuels inequalities in the society. So, as a measure against racial injustice, this article says that to contribute to this important discussion and signify the need for urgent work, UNESCO's headquarters in Paris hosted Global Forum Against Racism and Discrimination, and this was done in partnership with Republic of Korea. Now, the forum gathered policymakers, academics, and partners to initiate a new multi-stakeholder partnership on anti-racism. And this new proposed roadmap to tolerance calls for multi-sectoral effort to tackle the root cause of racism through anti-racist laws, policies, and programs. So, from your prelims perspective, the Global Forum Against Racism and Discrimination becomes important, and this was hosted by UNESCO and Republic of Korea. So the question remains as to what can be done to counter racism, especially by UNESCO. The first and foremost aspect highlighted here is education, that is to educate the society in order to develop a scientific temper or a scientific way of thinking and also to imbibe cultural values. Further, there is also need for interfaith communication bridges in schools and universities to appreciate diversity of different culture. Hereby, education of parents also becomes important as parents must teach their child for the need for coexistence of all cultures and communities simultaneously. Further, there's also need to understand the value of tolerance as this value of tolerance develops perspective in a child to appreciate diversities of the world cultures and also of various historical past. Now, in this regard, UNESCO is offering a master classes to empower students to become champions of anti-racism in schools and communities. Now, this will help the students not only to understand the diversity of different culture, but also propagate such ideas in communities at large. Further, UNESCO's International Coalition of Inclusive and Sustainable Cities also provides city-level planning for good practices in fight against racism, and it also calls for renewed commitment for equality. So overall, three aspects becomes important to fight racism. These are tolerance, equality, and steps taken for anti-discrimination. And fight against racism is not the job or work of any particular country, but it must be done at the global level. Thus, this article on tolerance becomes important from our examination perspective, as questions can be asked in your mains examination under GS paper 2, especially with respect to government policies and interventions for development in various sectors, welfare schemes for the vulnerable section of the population by center and states, and issues relating to development and management of social sector services relating to health, education, and human resources. Further, this topic also becomes important from the perspective of important international institution agencies, as questions can be asked with respect to UNESCO and its fight against racial injustice. And in the prelims, this topic gets covered under social development and sustainable development, including aspects of rights issues and public policy. Further, you can go through the DNS dated 15 June 2020 on the YouTube, whereby aspects of discrimination and constitutional provisions along with other legal provisions have been discussed. With this, let's move to the next article. Now, the next news to be discussed appears in the data point on page number 7. It says gender disparity deepens in India. Now, this news highlights about the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report of 2021. Now, this report has ranked India 140 out of 156 countries, and India has a score of 0.625, which indicates that India has achieved 62.5% gender parity. Now, if you go through this particular chart, you find out that after a consistent rise from the year 2006 till the year 2016, India saw a drastic decline in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report of 2021. As in 2016, India had achieved a gender parity of 68.3%, which has now declined to 62.5% as per the 2021 report. Now, this report takes into account four important dimensions. These are number one, economic participation and opportunity for women; second, education attainment for women; third, health and survival for women; and fourth, political empowerment of women. Now, this report says that India has been ranked among the bottom countries in terms of economic participation and opportunity and health and survival, as did many of its South Asian neighbors. However, the country fared relatively better in terms of political empowerment for women. Now, the top 10 countries with respect to this reports are Iceland, Finland, Norway, New Zealand, Sweden, Namibia, Rwanda, Lithuania, Ireland, and Switzerland. As Iceland has a gender gap parity of 89.2%, followed by Finland's 86.1%. Now, this topic mainly becomes important from our prelims perspective, and questions can be asked as to who publishes the Gender Gap Report of 2021, whereby the correct answer would be the World Economic Forum. And here, India has been ranked at 140 out of 156 countries. So, in the prelims examination, this topic can be asked under current events of international importance. So, after this discussion, let us quickly revise what we have discussed so far. Now, firstly, we discussed about election manifesto and the fact that these two articles highlights about the significance of election manifesto, especially with respect to welfare schemes, which appears on page number 6, and this article on page number 7 highlights about the importance given by the political parties regarding election manifesto, whereby they have highlighted about environmental concerns, ecological disasters, and also farmers' rights over big industrial projects. Further in this discussion, we also mentioned about what is an election manifesto and how does an election manifesto informs the voters. Later, we also discussed that election manifesto has also been a part of the Model Code of Conduct under Part 8 of MCC, and these election manifestos, including Model Code of Conduct, is not legally enforceable. Another important aspect is that there has also been provided a prohibitory period of release of these election manifestos, which is also provided under section 126 of the Representation of People Act 1951. Next, we discussed about the article on Kerala model of development, where we saw that by adopting the Kerala model of development, the state has not only seen rapid economic development but also rapid human development. And here, role of agricultural growth rate, increase in remittances from the Gulf, and setting up of Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board becomes critical, as this board takes money from the market in order to build large public schools and hospitals. Now, this board is the principal funding arm of the Kerala government and channelize funds for critical and large public infrastructure projects. Further, we also address the challenges with respect to this particular model, especially increase in public borrowing, adverse situation which might arise in the future such as natural disasters or job losses in the Gulf, and also issues pertaining to climate change, equity, debt sustainability, etc. Then we discussed this very important article with respect to fighting racism in the world. And here this article highlights about International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which was on 21st March. And the 2021 theme for this year is Youth Standing Up Against Racism, as youth took number of steps on the social media platform to galvanize against racial injustice. Now, in this regard, we also discussed about modern racism, which includes covert form of racism and also including techno-racism, where aspects of technology such as artificial intelligence is utilized to propagate racism. Further in this discussion, we also mentioned about Global Forum Against Racism and Discrimination, which was hosted by UNESCO in partnership with Republic of Korea, and this forum gathered policymakers, academics and partners to initiate a multi-stakeholder partnership against racism. Further, we also discussed as to steps which can be taken to counter racism, and here three important aspects was critical regarding tolerance, equality and anti-discrimination. Further, I also suggested that these aspects of discrimination, prejudice, etc. has also been discussed in the DNS dated 15 June 2020. So you can go through this particular DNS where this topic was dealt very extensively, not only regarding the social aspect of discrimination, but also the constitutional provisions and legal provisions were also discussed along with the aspects provided in NCERT. And lastly, we discussed about the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2021, whereby India has seen a drastic decline, having a score of 0.625 and has been ranked at 140 out of 156 countries. And as per the report, the top three rankers are Iceland, Finland, and Norway. So, with this summary, let's take up the question for the day. Now, based on our discussion, this becomes the practice question for the day. It says, consider the following statements about Global Gender Gap Report 2021. First, it is published by WHO. Second, India has been ranked 140 out of 156 countries. And third, it takes into account only educational attainment of women. Question is, which of the statements given above are correct? Options are A, 1 and 2 only, B, 2 and 3 only, C, 3 only, and D, 2 only. Now coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, the hotspot technology in cricket makes use of which of the following electromagnetic waves? Options were A, gamma rays, B, visible spectrum, C, infrared waves, and D, microwaves. Now in this, the correct answer is C, that is infrared waves. Now regarding the explanation, it highlights that hotspot is an infrared imaging system used in cricket to determine whether the ball has struck the batsman, bat or pad. And thermal imaging cameras measure minute amounts of heat generated from the energy transfer when the ball hits another object. And this is seen as a white spot when a negative image is then produced. So in this regard, the correct answer here becomes C, that is infrared waves. So with the question of the day, we come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you.